For a long time now, I have been entranced with the Nier saga. This duology of games has completely consumed my thoughts with their awe-inspiring narrative, themes, and utilization of the medium of video games. But what exactly is Nier, and where does it come from? What started off as a threequel to the Drakengard games after the misstep that was the second chapter, quickly became something entirely different during development. And in this transition, I feel like director Yoko Taro truly came into his own. Splitting itself off from the medieval dark fantasy world of its predecessors, and going for a follow-up to one of the most bizarre endings in the original game. They had multiple endings, it's complicated. It still retains a lot of that fantasy RPG DNA, while managing to feel like an entirely different series, hence the name Nier rather than Drakengard 3. While the game wasn't very well received back in 2010, it managed to tap into something truly special with the way it framed its narrative through its gameplay, and made use of tropes and conventions of the medium to make a statement about something much deeper. It's been said to death, but there really is nothing that describes the experience of playing Nier quite like it's a story that only works as a video game. So let's get to explaining why, shall we? Nier opens up on a modern doomsday scenario, where we see our protagonist fend off the relentless waves of monsters that are attacking him and his sister, Yona. It's worth mentioning that depending on whether you're playing the original 2010 version or the 2021 remake, the protagonist will either be Yona's father or brother, due to Square Enix mandating an older father character be made for the Western version of the game to increase its sales back then. The differences aren't huge overall, but there are things worth exploring in each version that both heighten and mess with certain scenes. Anyway, the protagonist, or simply Nier, makes a pact with a mysterious talking book to gain the power to protect Yona. According to Taro, the protagonist is unnamed, but fuck that, everyone calls him Nier, so he's Nier. And after going through a gauntlet that gets us all the way to level 30 in the span of a few minutes, the game hard cuts to a massive time skip of 1400 years. Time skips so far forward, in fact, that society has apparently collapsed to these monsters called Shades, and humanity is relegated to living in stock RPG villages of no more than 20 houses. For reasons still unclear, Nier and Yona are fine and haven't aged a day since then, but the girl is sick with a terrible disease called the Black Scrawl, so our protagonist is dead set on finding a way to cure her. One of the first things that happen on our quest is that Yona runs off to a dangerous old shrine because of a tale Nier tells her about a lunar tear, a legendary flower that could solve all their problems. Ever worried for Yona, Nier makes his way there and meets a talking book curiously similar to the one we saw in the intro, and immediately gets helped in defeating the Guardians that for some reason are holding Yona hostage. This is Grimoire Vice, aka the most pompous and sarcastic piece of shit you'll ever love, and the dynamic between his cynicism and Nier's naivete is always a joy to listen to.
Sheep hunting. There really is no task too immodest for you.
Hey, it's harder than it sounds. They're really squirrely and they run away fast.
So smite them with magic.
Aha!
What is it? Shades?
No, you're right. If I use magic, I don't have to get close.
Might I make another suggestion?
What?
Do not yell like a madman every time you come to a realization.
You can save Yona, Vice. Heck, maybe you can save the whole world.
Can I, though? I wonder.
I guess I won't use you for kindling after all.
You really should treat omnipotent magical beings with more respect.
Nier kinda acts as the village's handyman for most of the game's first half, being sent off to various places by Devola and Popola, the village chiefs, in order to search for the sealed verses, spells that, according to the Song of the Ancients, once collected into Vice, could even cure Yona. All of this we will accomplish with a healthy dose of shade killing, as the monsters seem to be popping up everywhere just like what we saw in the intro, kinda like they might be following us. Along our video game MacGuffin quest, we'll visit many peculiar places that serve to heighten Taro's unique and bizarre world building. We'll see the Eyrie, a village of hostile recluses who are very unkind to any strangers, especially a girl named Kaine, who later joins our party and is supposedly half shade and half human. Kaine has some sort of score to settle with a disgusting huge shade which we run into and help her kill for good, after which she will join us as a mainstay party member. We'll visit Seafront in search of a fish that can ease Yona's pain. This is the most typical location outside of our home, as it's just a seaside town with a cool lighthouse, guarded by an old lady who will demand our help with our matters, so we smile and oblige until she lets us go.
How can you just ignore an old woman in need? Oh, I weep for this generation.
After that, we'll go to the junk heap to strengthen our gear, an abandoned but still working factory where two brothers run on weaponry with scrap they salvage from within. Breaking into the heap itself, it seems that it is the remains of some sort of high-tech facility, still running while we raid the robots inside for metal scrap. After managing the upgrade, Kaine tells us about Facade, a village in the desert inhabited by a people with a completely different culture who speak a foreign language and have a little bit of rules to follow. The king of Facade was also infected by the Black Scrawl, but by the time we make it there, the old man has already died, and his hair is lost in a dangerous temple. So we head to the prince's rescue and manage to build trust with the people of the desert and their new ruler. There's also the Forest of Myth, this bizarre village taken by a disease called the Death Dream, which spreads through spoken word. It's all quite surreal, and the game goes into this fairly long text adventure sequence before we can make it out of the dream and free all the afflicted villagers. Finally, we'll head to the old Resident Evil inspired mansion where a strange young boy named Emil lives. He's been sending Yona letters and requires the help of Nier, now an up-and-coming hero, to settle an unknown matter. He has the power to turn the people he looks at into stone, reason for which he isolates himself. When we get there, we find out Emil's handler wants to find a way to cure his master's Medusa Eyes condition, the secret to doing so being hidden deep within the mansion. We fight another magical book that contains this secret, but the message is encrypted, so it will take some time to decipher. All of our travels will eventually be capped off with finding a sealed verse, gradually building back Grimoire Vice's power and inching ever closer to finding out if the legend we've been told is true or not. The locations in Nier aren't really standard fare, choosing instead to be more strange and very often less whimsical environments than typical fantasy. It's no secret that Nier is in part heavily inspired by the Zelda series, particularly Ocarina of Time. And this first part of the game mimics the first part of Ocarina in how you travel to various locations to set things right from whatever ill event befell them. But peppered along the way are hints of sadness or melancholy, like how the two brothers lost their mother in the junk heap, or how the lighthouse lady's story develops as you find out the letters she's been receiving are fake. It clues us into how the world may be a more cruel place than what the protagonist's perspective is mostly showing us. and in my opinion works a lot better with a younger brother Nier as a sort of reflection of the childlike hopeful innocence he holds towards the future. Another aspect directly inspired from Ocarina is the mid-game twist. In a shocking reveal, Nier was being led on all along by the Shadowlord, the leader of the Shades. Before we can use the sealed verses, he attacks the village and brings the heroes to their knees, capturing Yona but failing in his ultimate plan of fusing his own Grimoire Noir with Vice to set free Shades to the world. Much like how Ganondorf fails entering the Sacred Realm halfway through Ocarina, but still conquers Hyrule as a result of the hero's absence. Kaine is petrified by Emil to prevent a monstrous shade from escaping the library in a wonderful bit of cosmic irony, as she was the one who told Emil not to hate himself because of his eyes. Time skips forward another 5 years and oh no, he's hot. Meanwhile, Father gets a broken bucket from a flex tape commercial on his face, I don't know.
Now that's a lot of damage!
Nier's search for Yona has been relentless, but has shown little results, and so the man we meet after the time skip is a fair bit more detached and cynical Nier than the one we knew before. He's not an asshole or anything, he'll still gladly accept any menial request from the villagers, but something has clearly changed in the guy. He has now gone through the loss of innocence and the loss of the person he cared the most about, only bothering to wake up because he's clinging onto the hope that Yona is still safe out there somewhere. Thankfully, after receiving a letter from Emil, things start looking up, as he might have found a way to unpetrify Kaine. So we explore deeper within Emil's mansion and, surprise surprise, it was just a front for an unethical laboratory where humans were experimented on to be turned into weapons for an ancient war. It's revealed that Emil has a sister who was turned into such a powerful weapon that they had to make Emil's petrifying eye lasers just to contain her, and once we run into her, they fuse together into the skeleton boy we all know and love. After easing Emil's fears about his new body, he joins our party as another mainstay companion. With his newfound powers of the ultimate weapon, Emil frees Kaine, and we quickly dispatch the shade that we couldn't even scratch years ago. The party is back together, but the villagers are too scared of Kaine and Emil, so their union is cut short and they are exiled from the village. Nier is understandably very upset, but there isn't much he can do about it, as he realizes Kaine had always been sleeping outside the whole time they had known each other. In spite of this, things start quickly coming together when Popola, researching the texts in the library, discovers that the shrine we found Vice in all those years ago might be connected to the Shadowlord's hiding place. However, to enter the castle we're gonna need 5 key fragments, so the hunt for the MacGuffin is back on in the locations we previously visited, which lets us see how things have changed in the world. And my, have things changed. Not only is the tone of the second half a lot more pessimistic than the first, some disasters are even directly caused by the heroes, but I'm getting ahead of myself. For now, what we can glean is that there are yet even more shades causing tragedy that need a little bit of killing, so we merrily murder the holders of the 5 keys to the Shadowlord's castle and prepare ourselves to storm the place. We have a bit of freedom in choosing how to proceed here, but in general we'll revisit all the locations from the first half and find out how things have been going. Starting from Seafront, the place isn't actually much different, and truthfully nothing much goes on here in the base game. There is an added story portion in the remake, but we'll talk about it later. I assume the original 2010 release just ran out of resources to have anything happen here post time skip. We discover the first key fragment at the Lost Shrine, but while battling one of the guardians who survived our encounter 5 years ago, a weird incident occurs as Kaine's shade takes full control of her. After a brief fight, Emil manages to call out to Kaine and bring her back from her possession, thanks to the bond the two have developed over their cursed existences. The area has instead seen a pretty major shift. There are people outside selling things at a market? Yet the residents inside the houses seem clueless to it all. This is in fact a trap laid by the Shades, possessing human bodies and ambushing us by combining into this very weird magic sphere that pushes us so far Emil goes kinda overboard and deletes the whole village. As it turns out, the area is revealed to have been a village where humans and Shades tried to coexist by willingly giving up their bodies for possession. Seems weird they would ostracize Kaine then, but there might be more to it we're not yet privy to. Our return to the Forest of Myths sees us reach into the depths of the Memory Tree, the sort of guardian deity of the village, to find a shade feeding on memories and killing it, all once again in text adventure fashion for the joy of the readers out there. Shoutouts to language. Going back to the junk heap, we instead set our sights on a military-grade robot responsible for the death of one of the two brothers at the weaponry. Gideon is all that's left now, and he does have an unhinged hatred for machines, but who are we to say no to an old friend? As we fight the robot, it seems a shade is using it and giving it commands, so I bet Nier feels pretty good about killing it in the end. Finally, we get an invitation to the King of Assad's wedding, heading there to celebrate. To avoid any accidents, the Royal Guard decides it would be a good idea to exterminate as many wolves as possible, since they have been increasing in number lately. This has the exact opposite effect, since the wolves were being led by a shade that promptly butts into the wedding and kills the bride for revenge. Cycles of violence and all that, I'm sure Nier putting an end to the shade is fine. After getting rid of all these shades, we finally assemble the key to get past that fateful altar in the Lost Shrine and enact our desperate plan to rescue Yona. With no second thoughts, we enter the castle, and here is where the game finally starts showing its hand and hitting us with the, and excuse my use of the technical term, real shit. The Shadowlord's castle is maybe one of the best climaxes I've ever experienced in a game, and pays off all the tedious simplistic gameplay up to that point with how good it is. Right off the bat, we're stuck in a room where we have to answer some bizarre questions from a couple of doves. They mention something about separating body from soul to extend one's life and escape some sort of black disease. This should already basically spell out what the shades actually are, but Nier, ever the no-nonsense guy, lets Vice deal with it and continues onwards. He runs into Devola and Popola, who are revealed to have actually been working for the Shadowlord all along and have planned all this out alongside him. After a brief fight, they run away and let us enter the castle ourselves, where obviously we start murdering some shades. Well, that is until this giant boar shade proves to be too much for the party, at which point the King of Assad barges in to buy us the chance to move forward. Nier knows his friend stands no chance against the seemingly mortal shade and gets rightfully slapped by Kaine and told to get a move on lest it all be in vain. So we pull through and once again reach Devil and Popola, who finally spell it all out for us. Shades are human souls, and the humans we see all throughout the game are replicants, empty husks meant to act as containers for said souls. The Shadowlord is the original stable gestalt, a term used to describe a shade that hasn't completely lost its mind due to the whole trauma of not having a body, unlike the many we see in the game. He was the person we played as in the intro, seeing the moment where he relinquished his human form for the power to protect his sister. Him alone is the key to saving humanity, as he is the only one capable of preventing other shades from relapsing and going on a murder spree. And he's fated to reconcile all the souls and bodies and rebuild humanity from the catastrophe that befell it 1400 years ago, an outbreak for which the only cure was separating body from soul. The Black Scroll then is nothing more than the reflection on a replicant's body of its shade's mental state, with the shade relapsing leading to the corresponding body being afflicted with a disease. The Shadowlord kidnapped Yona's replicant to save his sister's shade that was slowly beginning to relapse by fusing the body and soul. But it is too late. Nier and the others do not even get to process all of this, and so they push on. Replicants have developed their own individuality, and there's only one way to end this now: defeat the Shadowlord and save Yona, or die trying, the objective Nier has basically lived for up until now. Emil ends up having to sacrifice himself to allow Nier and Kaine to get past Popola, maddened by the loss of Devola at her hands. And so the adventure comes to an end with the battle against the Shadowlord, the original Nier we played as all those hours ago, who's been doing all he can to save his own shade version of Yona. Cue like the best OST I've ever heard, and the rest is history. Feeling the pain of the conflict at hand, Gestalt Yona sacrifices herself to allow the replicants the chance to live, as she heard the voice of the replicant Yona inside her, and this destroys the Shadowlord, who goes out in a blaze of anguish and despair so intense that Vice also has to leave us so we can defeat this rampaging husk who has lost every reason to live. And so Yona is saved, and Kaine leaves to take care of some business, leaving brother and sister alone at last. The credits may roll, but it's fair to say this isn't a happy ending in the slightest. However, if you know Taro, you know the game is not done yet. Starting the save file over again puts us into Route B of Nier Replicant, which massively expands the context of the events that happen after the time skip. The Route B narrative is framed through the lens of what Kaine knows, being possessed by a shade and able to understand what they're saying, something we couldn't glimpse on our first playthrough. This is a brilliant way to implement a New Game Plus feature, adding previously missing voice lines and fleshing out aspects in light of something we couldn't have known yet when we first experienced playthrough A. Route B opens up with Kaine being unfrozen from her petrified state and gives us extensive backstory on her past. She used to live outside the area with her grandma, who was basically the only person to love her for who she was, as the other kids bullied her for being a quote-unquote freak. It all tumbles down even further when her life gets destroyed by Hook, the giant disgusting rat shade we fight during the first half of the game, who kills her grandma. Left at the brink of death, Kaine is given the choice to keep on living by Tyran, a despicable shade who possesses replicants and enjoys indiscriminate murder. Kaine accepts his conditions of always having to carry hatred in her heart, just so she can have a chance at revenge against the shade that ruined her life, and later chooses to keep on living as Nier Sword, the only other person who's ever accepted her for who she is. This is just the first of a lot more cutscenes and lines of dialogue that are added as we're clued into Kaine's side of things. We can now understand what the shades are saying, which makes the events we play through a lot more horrifying in retrospect. Disappointingly, we're still playing the exact same second half of the game we already played through, with no alterations whatsoever on the gameplay side. It would have been cool if Kaine had been the playable character here, but understandably they didn't really have the kind of resources to make that happen for a game that was so incredibly niche. By the time the remake came out and actually added a playable Kaine section, the original game structure would have probably been hard to alter in order to let her be playable and keep the entire weapon system, as you needed to unlock the other two endings. Thankfully, the sequel, Automata, actually delivers on this front, but we're not here to talk about that yet. Still, the idea of Route B is one of the most commendable things about Nier Replicant, as it successfully reframes the narrative and gives us the full context of our actions, which, while it could be gleaned from the not-so-subtle details in Route A, lends a whole lot more tragic weight to the story we just experienced. It leverages one of the key aspects of most games, which is memory, being able to track progress and accommodating for repeated playthroughs in various ways, and extends the concept to actually have the game's telling of the events shift with our newfound perspective after Route A, playing with our foreknowledge. As a New Game Plus mode, Route B goes above and beyond what was necessary, and caps off with a different final cutscene showing the Shadowlord's final moments and a different version of the ending credits. At this stage all is well and good, the game's made its point quite elegantly, and despite replaying the second half twice, the extras made it an overall worthwhile experience. But what if there was still something very special out there for us? As soon as we beat Route B, we're informed that by collecting every weapon in the game, we can access one final choice after the ending. And so starts our Route C playthrough. Unfortunately, that's kind of where the novelties end, as with the original release of the game, everything up until the final cutscene in Route C plays out exactly the same as Route B. If you already bothered to collect all the weapons beforehand, there's not much in there for you to do other than practice a speedrun of the second part of the game, I guess. The remake somewhat addresses this in a couple of ways. It adds a handful of new cutscenes with Devola and Popola following their plan at key points, and the new episode Mermaid Story Beat has particular changes for all 3 playthroughs so far. It's still hard to justify the existence of Route C though. I feel like if there was a skip option for players that had already collected all the weapons, it would go a long way to making things better. But oh well, the repetition is kind of baked into Nier's identity. So we once again get to that fateful encounter with the Shadowlord, which is still enough to make me emotional no matter how many times I play through it. And this time, the business Kaina had to take care of in Ending A is finally shown to us. The celebration for the victory over the Shades is short-lived in fact, as Kaina and Tyran begin to realize their pact has been broken. And when Tyran takes over, both of them will lose it and turn into mindless killers due to the death of the Shadowlord. So we have to fight Kaina's Shade form once again, this time without a mill to pull her out of it. And through a change of heart in Tyran, when he realizes it will all soon be over for him, we are given an opportunity to save Kaina. After subduing her, the player is given a choice between killing Kaina and freeing her from her torment, or saving her in exchange for Nier's very own existence and all memories of him being erased. So here is where the endings branch out into C and D. Choosing to kill Kaina results in ending C, where she thanks us for bringing an end to her suffering, and Nier lives out the rest of his days with Yona before inevitably dying from the Black Scrawl. A sad conclusion for sure, and it's hard not to feel a bit cruel after killing Kaina when we know Emil is still alive from ending B. However, the thing we're really here for is ending D. The beautiful part of this ending is that, contrary to the rest of the game, you're not only told what happens in the story, but the deletion of Nier and all the memories of him also happens on your real-ass console or PC you're playing on. The price to save Kaina is in fact your very own save file, which you watch get slowly deleted after being asked if you're sure about it at least 4 times. It's genuinely one of the greatest moments I've experienced, making full use of the medium of games to strengthen the narrative impact and weight of this final choice. You get to see what happens shortly after, as a confused Kaina and Yona are left to piece things together while missing all their memories of Nier. And this is the note the original game ends on, a tragically touching finale where we see our main cast torn apart both figuratively and literally, after which the only things that we're left with are the memories of those events and our melancholic feelings. And as poetic and complete as Ending D feels, it surprised me when I found out that not only does the 2021 remake add an extra epilogue, but that said epilogue was always supposed to be a part of the story, but was likely cut from the original game for budgetary reasons. Shortly after the original game came out in Japan, a rich art book was released called Grimoire Nier. This art book didn't only contain the usual fare of concept art and promotional material, but also a bunch of canonical short stories that take place in the world of Nier. Most of them are just there to flesh out the lore and are pretty inconsequential to the events of the game, but one of them specifically stands out. Titled The Lost World, the story sees Kaine 3 years after the battle with the Shadowlord, fighting against the machines that are employed to reset the Replicant project back to zero, and finding her way back to the memory tree, inside of which lies the beating heart of the program. In here she finds the impossible. The memories of Nier are still intact in the tree's cold electronic storage, leading to Kaine finally remembering what has been eating away at her for all this time, and bringing back the Nier they all know and love. Supposedly Taro always wanted this to be the real ending, as can be gleaned by the fact that every other game he's worked on has an ending E that bookends the entire narrative. But the original game stopped at D and left it at that. However, with the overwhelming success of Nier Automata, pulling Platinum Studios out of certain bankruptcy and propelling Taro's narrative into the mainstream video game discussion, the renewed popularity of this once extremely niche series allowed the people at Toy Logic to remake Nier under Taro's direction and with a lot of the staff that worked on the original. Thanks to this opportunity, 2 stories from Grimoire Nier were adapted into playable sections, those being The Little Mermaid and the aforementioned Lost World. The way The Lost World is adapted into game form is one of the best additions in the remake, finally letting us take control of Kaine 3 years after ending D and go into the Forest of Myth to investigate the reset of the Replicant program. We delve deep into the roots of Sleeping Beauty, the artificial tree that has started spewing the robots running around killing replicants. Before that though, we're let loose in the northern plains, with a ton of shades to test our combat abilities on and get a feel for Kaine's controls. It really makes you wish it could be playable in other parts of the game as a post-game bonus, but unfortunately that's not an option. Maybe one day with mods. Anyway, the plot soon thickens with two strangely familiar figures emerging from the cable roots within the depths of the tree. These administrators want to test Kaine for some unknown reason, and so we're soon caught in a string of fights. Once the situation starts to look hopeless, Emil comes to the rescue.
Now with extra arms.
And we somehow enter the data space in a setting that looks extremely reminiscent of Automata's hacking scenes. Here Kaine is forced to battle her own memories of Hook, but through the struggle associated with her trauma, she also remembers the one person she had been living for all this time, defying the curse placed on her after ending D. Why or how this happens is like a very deep lore question about singularity in the Drakenir universe, but honestly I know nothing about that other than it also had something to do with Drakengard 3. Ultimately, Kaine manages to seemingly defeat the administrators by remembering Vice and using his power in the memory data space, after which a huge flower blooms in which a new Nier reconstructed from memories is being gently held by Kaine as Emil floats by. Your save files are then restored as they were before ending D, which is a nice touch, as E functions as a complete reversal of D, both thematically and mechanically.
Our journey may have been meaningless.
Our past may have been a mistake.
But we're not going back.
Even if this world comes to an end.
Because this is the world with the people we cherish.
To touch briefly on The Little Mermaid, it tells the story of Nier and his companions investigating the site of a massive shipwrecked vessel on the coast of Seafront, and running into the monstrously powerful Kraken-like shade that caused all of it. The shade in question isn't just a ruthless killing machine though, as it is revealed to still be fully conscious, yet eats humans, or well, replicants I guess, because she thinks that once she's eaten enough, she'll turn back into a human too. Quite the grim twist on the actual fable of The Little Mermaid. Knowing Taro initially wanted this game to explore various grimdark renditions of classic fables and myths, this section being added into the actual game is extremely on brand for the whole setting, since a lot of the other bosses also take name after characters from fables. The last element to this is the Redbag family and the Postman, which all play a part in the story. From my understanding, as I haven't played the original Nier all the way through, the Redbag family wasn't a thing back then, and was also added in the remake. This section marks the end of their arc, as the husband is tragically killed by the Kraken shade named Louise, all while his wife desperately seeks Nier's help to locate him after one of their usual arguments. In all of this, Louise poses as this innocent girl who survived the shipwreck and is living inside the ship, while the postman of Seafront takes care of her. Once Nier's party finally manages to reach her and Kaine recognizes her as a shade, all hell breaks loose, and we're subjected to one of the most spectacular boss fights in the game, complete with an amazing new theme. In Route A and B, victory is achieved by Kaine threatening the postman's life to expose Louise's weak spot, as she genuinely did care about him. Route B shows us the backstory of the postman, stumbling into Louise and helping her by bringing her food and teaching her a song on how to write in the replicant's language. Louise wishes to become human, so she can be accepted and live with the postman, and figures the best way to do so is to kill and eat other replicants. Yeah. In Route C, the party is actually strong enough to avoid having to resort to the postman tactic, but that's about the only change, which leads into a short 2D section where you climb on Louise and deal the final blow. Hardly justifies the existence of Route C, but it's something, I guess. The epilogue also changes between Route B and C. The first time we're shown Kaine's final cutscene where she reads out a letter left by Louise, then she rips it apart as Tyrant says his usual edgy shit. While in Route C she actually keeps the letter and delivers it to the postman, who is then struck by how he still feels sad after finding out what Louise did. Overall, I really like this portion of the game, even if playing through it is kind of annoying with how much of a pace breaker it is, and how it is sandwiched in the middle of the base game's progression with no way to opt out. Unfortunately, it contributes to making Path B and C more of a slog than in the original game. So, by now I hope to have demonstrated that this game isn't afraid to get into some deep matters, and it's time to talk about what I think makes this all work as a genuinely touching piece of art. Deeply rooted within the Nier experience is an abundant exploration of humanity. Despite the characters being effectively clones meant to mimic human activities without any individuality, said individuality spontaneously manifests itself anyways. Not unlike our very own consciousness as living beings might be nothing more than an emergent consequence of our evolution. And it's because of this that all of the conflict takes place. What were once meant as mere shells created out of necessity for survival have made their own societies and cultures, forgetting about their creators, who now roam the lands as a bunch of literal shadows of their former selves. So it's in both of these factions that we find plenty of representations of the human experience, with Shades living through what is effectively a doomsday scenario, tormented by the existential dread of losing their minds, and always risking a permanent end to their centennial existence. Meanwhile, replicants are left to their own short lives, unaware of their status as expendable bodies for whenever the time comes, living through cycle after cycle of nothing happening while the world stagnates. It's worth mentioning that a lot of the background details of the world aren't outright stated, and are instead found in particular loading screen text or hinted at in the game itself. A lot of writing went into the extended material for the game, and I could sit here all day talking about what happens in that 1400-year time skip, but it's not really necessary to get into that, because even if what we see of the world of Nier is a little window of time, it's more than enough to stick. At the heart of the matter, regardless of any external material, Nier is fundamentally about understanding. Language, communication, and connections are the primary means of interfacing with the other we all share, and it showcases both what kindness, unconditional love, and empathy are capable of, just as much as apathy, othering, and misinformation are. Shades and replicants speak different languages and cannot communicate with each other except for rare scenarios. This greatly affects who the characters are able to reason and empathize with. Even with Vice's ability to translate the language of Facade, he never really makes any attempts to do the same with Shades, suggesting there is a much deeper rift between their forms of communication. The theme of incommunicability runs deep within the narrative, and is the fundamental reason the conflict carries on. Plenty of times in Route B we hear the Shades, what they say and think, how many of them don't even wish to fight, or lament the state of things that is forcing them to engage in this war. But the rift is too insurmountable, and no one has any willingness to reach out by this point. The Eyrie seems to have bridged this gap somewhat, but the fear of the reactions of other replicants is quite literally keeping them in the closet about it, too afraid to ever speak out and fight for what could well and truly save the world. Another little thematic touch is how the ending themes for each of the routes change language as a reflection of the events that transpire. In Rotate, the ending is sung in English and tells of the struggle of the replicants in a heroic fashion, a war between light and darkness, but we know that things aren't really like that. It's a beautiful song, but it hardly gives the complete picture, and I like to think this is what Nier tells Yona about his adventures after it's all over. Ending B is instead sung in a fictional language that sounds similar to French, but doesn't actually carry any understandable meaning. Like how the Shades language must have been to those who couldn't understand it. The song, however, has plenty of pathos. The words sound like real speech. It could feasibly be a real language, and it transmits the same feeling of beauty and tragedy as the other version. We have now seen the Shades side of the story, and connect much deeper to the Shadowlord, so this different ending reflects our perspective of him. While we will never understand the song fully, there is a spark of meaning that can get through even to us. Ending C uses a more Gaelic sounding fake language to accentuate our memory of Kaine after we kill her, echoing our character theme, while endings D and E go for a more Fa Japanese inspired song, probably to connect much deeper to its expected audience in its home country, as when Nier originally launched, no one was expecting much from its English adaptation. Speaking of the music in this game, it has to be stated that the soundtrack composed for Nier Replicant is some of the most beautiful music I've heard, full stop. The OST, composed by Keiichi Okabe and performed by Emmy Evans, hits with the emotional weight of a freight train. The ethereal chaos language vocals mixed with the beautiful orchestra instrumentals filled with pianos, violins, drums, and acoustic guitars contribute to a surprisingly introspective and somber soundtrack, never quite hitting you with the confidence of the usual triumphant video game score, but rather choosing to let you simmer in the jaw-dropping melodies and vocals as they quietly unfold and take permanent hold of your thoughts. Now, I'm not a musician or anything even remotely close to it, so I'm not really qualified to speak of anything other than the feelings I get from these songs, but the remake did win the soundtrack category at last year's Game Awards, so that can give you an idea of how respected this work is. You've been hearing it throughout this whole video, but the sheer amount of songs and versions is staggering too. The game adopts dynamic layers to its music, adding percussion during combat and other neat little touches to heighten and accentuate specific moments. Like of the overworld theme, Hills of Radiant Winds loses some of its layers in the Junk Heap area to represent the lifelessness of the mechanical factory when contrasted with the grassy fields. Another peculiarity is how in the vocals every pause for breath is audible, lending all of it an air of being a live performance, getting you closer to the person behind the voice, building on the theme of connection. The music in Nier is full of little touches like these, and the quality of the compositions is also incredible to match. It must be said that the game wouldn't feel nearly as poignant without the massive legwork the music puts in to heighten each and every sequence. It's the kind of soundtrack that can get you to cry even when listening to it in isolation, because you've internalized its meaning in the moment of the story associated with it. Another thing that really ends up mattering in experiencing Nier is the characters. The game takes a lot of stock conventional RPG townsfolk, but ends up giving them a layer of depth that makes you care about them, as the world time and time again shatters the goodwill of our protagonist and all those around him. Take some of my favorite examples, like the Lighthouse Lady or the Forge Brothers. The former is a story about identity, purpose, and what happens when your raison d'être is actually a lie. The Lighthouse Lady gets up every day in hopes that her lover, who's been sending her letters, might return from the seas he sailed off to. But after helping her with various matters at the lighthouse, it's revealed that her lover likely died years ago, and the letters she's been receiving were actually penned by the local postman to keep her going and save her from grief. You actually get to choose whether you reveal this truth to her or not, and honestly this might be the single hardest choice the player is asked to make in the game, or at least it was for me. The latter is a story about loss, anger, and revenge leading to a self-destructive cycle. You meet these blacksmith brothers fairly early on in the game and proceed to watch as their situation gets worse over your adventure. First you find out their mother has died, then after the time skip only Gideon, the younger brother, is left alive, consumed by his hatred and need for revenge on the machines of the Junk Heap that he thinks ruined his life. By the end, he is nothing more than a psychotic loner. Both of these stories are very relevant to the struggles Nier also goes through, and the themes of loss of purpose, blinding hatred, and living a lie are all embedded into the core of the Nier series, both in Replicant and Automata. They all foreshadow situations and events that our protagonist eventually finds himself in, and they give appropriate weight and context to those dilemmas you were merely pondering when looking at them with the detached eyes of an RPG hero going through the grand adventure you deluded yourself into believing. There is also a flip side to all this misery, however, as some of the things you do and accomplish will leave you with something that feels warm and wholesome and special in just the right ways. My favorite examples being Yona's cooking and the Red Bag family lunch. Nier and Yona have found themselves growing up as orphans and only had village chiefs Devola and Popola to rely on as parental figures. So seeing him acting like a loving older brother, putting up with his sister's particular cooking, and going through the non-trivial effort to gather the ingredients just to provide a moment of family and bonding for the both of them is too heartwarming to ever skip out on, even on repeat playthroughs. It's made clear through the letters from Yona you see in the loading screens that she wishes nothing more than to spend time with her brother, and this is one of the rare occasions when she actually does. Later on, after Yona's kidnapping, there's this couple of bickering lovers that you run into at a few key points of the game. Much like with Yona, at a certain point the man sends you on a fetch quest to gather some gifts for their anniversary, as he forgot what it was exactly he promised his wife. Since they're fanatics for all things red, you gather a bunch of red items in the hopes that they'll be the right gift. But none of them end up being what was promised. Once the gig is up and the gifts are handed over, we find out all she wanted was a home-cooked meal by her husband, and she invites Nier over to repay him for the trouble of finding the gifts. It's here we're treated to this very special and sweet monologue.
I'm at a dining table filled with apple-based cuisine, red roses, and a single crimson stone. Illuminated by candlelight, the married couple fills the room with joyous laughter. The scene fills me with an unfamiliar sense of calm. Just a happy family gathered around the table. It feels so very normal. I never thought I'd feel this way again. So I stuff my face with the great feast before me, hoping it helps to hide the tears welling in my eyes.
And it's just, oh my heart. All of these elements coalesce to form one messy, melancholic and bittersweet whole, setting the perfect atmosphere for this kind of story to really hit you hard. Playing and immersing yourself in it via the interactions, combat and music in the game is an experience that can't really be replicated outside of the medium. And it brings you, the actual human being experiencing all of this, closer to each facet of this little fucked up diorama inside your machine. But I can't possibly talk about characters in Nier without mentioning what are by far some of the best written party members in gaming history. Our merry band of war criminals is composed of Nier, Grimoire Weiss, Kaine and Emil, and each one of the characters that accompany us are incredibly well realized. Weiss has this very self-important attitude and sarcastic demeanor that works really well in contrast to young Nier and Emil's childishness. He'll often be the one groaning and complaining about the game's admittedly more boring and menial sections, with his overly verbose manner of speaking reminiscent of something like a fantasy wizard, which makes him a joy to listen to. Liam O'Brien did a splendid job with his performance here. His relationship with Kaine is also the stuff of legends, as the two hate each other with a passion that only best frenemies are capable of, constantly calling her a hussy and being met with a turbulence of profanity that only Kaine can deliver. While his character arc in the story might not be the most noteworthy, ending up on the side of the replicants due to his amnesia and empathizing with their struggle by the end, he offers so much to the character dynamics that he is always fun to hear talk.
I should have taken that job as a cookbook when I had the chance.
Emil is instead the resident sweetest boy, who also doubles as like the strongest thing around, forever tortured by his immense capability for harm, but wanting most of all to be with the people he loves and help out. Being a child experiment from an ancient bygone war, Emil is both unaging and monstrously powerful, being able to turn anything he looks at into stone and shutting himself away due to that. He has a lot in common with Kaine in that, and they connect with each other because of it right from the moment they meet. That scene where you peek at them out by themselves at night, talking about stuff and just chilling while you're not there, it really solidifies how close these two are. Also, when he turns into this skeleton-looking thing halfway through the game, what does Nier do? He immediately goes to hug this boy, and oh god, the heart. At least Emil is finally happy you can see him, and yeah, he's fucking hot, bro. He's also implied to have feelings for our protagonist and is confirmed to be gay, which can be inferred from this scene.
What's up?
Just having trouble getting to sleep.
Something bothering you?
No, the opposite, in fact. I'm just so excited about the wedding that I can't settle down. I bet it's gonna have streamers and dancing and bears on unicycles and everything. I'm sorta jealous. I wish I was Fira.
You'll find a nice bride someday, Emil.
Huh? Oh, right. Bride.
You must be tired indeed if you misunderstood that simple social nicety.
Yeah, that's not exactly it.
And you can't help but feel for the little guy. He goes through a lot, fuses with his monster sister Halua, and ultimately sacrifices himself at the castle so Nier can reach his goal. In Route B we can see some of the inner conversations he has with Halua, and how she is actually the one sacrificing herself so that Emil can move forward, as he is spat out as just ahead in the middle of the desert, surviving still. It's amazing how he keeps his cheer and liveliness until the end. Then we have Kaine. Kaine is probably the most complex and well-realized character in the whole game, even if at first glance you might dismiss her as some extremely cheap fan service. I gotta admit I'm really not a fan of her design at all, and while there are reasons for it that contextualize why it's so aggressively sexualized, it still just kinda falls flat for me on a purely aesthetic level. What really makes Kaine special, however, is her backstory and character arc throughout the game. We don't really find out much about her in Route A other than she's cursed with a shade living inside her, and even then it's not made clear what that entails. She will often swear like a sailor though, and that's enough to keep her entertaining at first.
Tear out your goddamn eyes and piss in the sockets!
Good sweet lord! I have never heard such a thing.
It's only in Route B that we're given all that we need to understand Kaine on a deeper, more personal level. The first thing that is made apparent is that, even before the Shade possession, Kaine has always been an outcast with only her grandma to rely on. It's heavily implied that she's an intersex individual who would want nothing more than to be accepted as female, but the other people at the area treat her like a freak instead. She's forced to live outside the village, but as long as her grandma Kali is with her and loves her unconditionally, she can bear it and find a modicum of happiness in her younger years. This momentary equilibrium of things all changes once her house at the periphery of the area is attacked by Hook, killing Kali and leaving Kaine for dead in the burning rubble of her former home. It's at this moment that Kaine's hatred for Shades burns so bright that Tyran possesses her by promising her revenge and power in exchange for her heart being forever consumed by hate. This is the Kaine we meet near the start of the game, still on the lookout for Hook to enact her revenge, still looking for someone to accept her for who she is after the passing of her grandma. Since Hook gets dealt with relatively early on during her journey, Kaine is then left directionless, content with death. But thanks to Nier and Vice showing her that they care, they want her to stick with them, they accept her, she gains the will to keep going. She gains hope that they will defeat the Shades, they will release her from her possession and seize the possibility of the life she always wanted. As the adventure goes on, she builds her extremely cute and warm relationship with Emil, starting with her understanding words about his eyes.
Emil, listen to me.
What is it, Kaine?
Your eyes are not a sin. Don't ever be ashamed of them.
Eventually Kaine starts to find genuine happiness and comfort, and begins losing herself to Tyran. This dramatically comes up in two major instances during the game. The first time is right after we finish off the boss in the Lost Shrine, as Kaine is fatally wounded at the end of the battle. And maybe feeling like she can finally let go of it all, Tyran is forced to take over to save their lives and starts attacking Nier and Emil. After subduing the possession, it's only thanks to the desperate pleas of Emil that Kaine is able to come back to her senses, and his speech is fucking heartbreaking.
Kaine! Kaine!
Kaine!
I couldn't hold it back. I can't be with...
We're always going to be together, Kaine. If you transform again, we'll just stop it again. As many times as it takes. I don't care how tough it is. We're gonna get you back. I like sleeping outside because I'm with you, Kaine. I'm able to ignore my appearance and keep going because of you. I'm weak, and I'm sad, and I'm lonely. But you make me strong. You're my friend, and I need you. So don't you dare leave me!
All right. Stop crying.
And of course, when our journey comes to an end, the same thing happens for endings C and D. Only without Emil being there to help us, we'll have to rely on Tyran's recent change of heart to do something about it. Because indeed, by the end of the journey, even Tyran realizes his own nihilism was full of shit, maybe being changed by Kaine's progressive softening, and offers us the chance to save her. During Route B, the game gets really good at making you feel for her, revealing all the hardship she went through, and it's impossible not to want to help her in some way. Endings C and D give us precisely that, but to truly set Kaine free and allow her to experience all the joys of life uncompromised, the only choice we are left with is our self-sacrifice. For only through letting go of the game, deleting our save data and leaving the experience to sit only within our memories, is the game world and all the events and characters we came to know reduced back to zero, our progress undone, and finally everything and everyone set free from this artificial world. The finality of which is shown to you in excruciating detail, each page of Grimoire Vice slowly wiped before our very eyes. Nier was the first game to actually strengthen its message of pure, selfless sacrifice with the properties of its very medium, and this moment is the one that solidifies its standing as one of the most important steps forward in exploring the narrative potential of video games. Seriously, I can't get enough of Ending D and its meaning, both in story and as a meta-commentary on our relationship with fictional worlds, characters, and the endings of the stories we experience. Also, she beats the shit out of Nier in like the best scene. Me next, please? Kaine and Emil are also some of the best queer representation games I'd ever seen up to that point. Having them be deep and complex individuals who struggle with the problems of bigotry and self-doubt due to their nature, but don't let it define them and fight tooth and nail to carve out their spot in the world, and build connections with those that accept them. They aren't solely defined by their suffering, they are the most consistent support we get throughout our adventure in every sense of the word, and they are the most sympathetic characters in the game by far. You love to see it. The party in Nier is a group of complex, troubled outcasts that find comfort only in each other, bonding through a good old quest and finally getting torn apart in the painful finale. It's a band of mass-murdering psychos who are also the sweetest, most understanding people with those they empathize with. It's hard not to relate to at least one of their struggles. Lastly, there's the Shadowlord, arguably more of a tragic hero than a villain, being the last hope for salvation and experiencing centuries worth of constant, debilitating loneliness and pain, as he waits for the moment when he's finally set free from his overwhelming responsibility and can finally reunite with his loved one, whose shade has been put in stasis to avoid relapsing. You really can't even fault anything about the guy, other than he just happens to have conflicting goals to the protagonist. And the moment when Gestalt Yona decides to end this war once and for all is truly one of the single most heartbreaking scenes I've seen in media. That single instant is when it's all over. Seeing the Shadowlord writhe and wallow in his despair as he's overcome with the unbridled grief that only such a terrible loss can command is something I'll never forget. Failure is also an important theme in Nier, being unable to make the difference despite everything you try. Having your life's goal cruelly taken from you in nothing but mere seconds. But it's in these final moments that the crushing sadness of failure gets turned around in Ending B. Despite everything, for a brief time him and Yona were able to be together, and that's what matters the most. As the final thoughts in the mind of the Shadowlord turned to those days in the ruins of the city, scrapping for food during the apocalyptic pandemic that ended the human race, and fighting just to keep on living one day longer. Even if their time together came to an abrupt end, nothing can take away the memories of those snowy summer days. No matter the conclusion, it's the unflinching love and kindness you live with that counts. Another aspect that strikes me about Nier Replicant's narrative is how the murder of an outrageous number of people is explored. We see it all the time, whether it's uninformed hatred like Nier's, sheer sadism like the Shade Hook, or freakishly twisted thought processes like Louise. In Taro's words, he wrote Drakengard's characters as insane psychopaths because he thought it was necessary for a person to commit such atrocities. But in Nier Replicant we see an evolution of this line of reasoning into something much more refined. It's not really necessary to be insane to be a mass murderer, you just have to think you're right. A reflection born out of the USA's disastrous imperialist campaign after 9/11. In his quest, Nier never stops to think about the humanity of his enemies, even in the moments when it's most apparent, and would rather cover his ears and pretend none of it is true than confront the suffering he's caused.
What in the... I never realized shades were capable of rational thought.
I don't care if they can tap dance and play the fiddle. I just want to kill him without all this hassle.
This is a pretty clear condemnation of righteousness taken in actions rooted in hatred. How the cycle of violence perpetuates itself is made abundantly clear, with an origin point so far back in time no one even remembers it. The question that I constantly ponder, even as of writing this video, is if things could have really gone differently. Seeing Nier, Kaine, and Emil's characters find a way to truly be the heroes and save everyone, rather than inevitably leading to the extinction of humanity. I flip-flop between the possibility of this happening or not constantly, and to be honest I couldn't tell you what I even believe about it for sure. But let's explore the situation a little more. The more cynical view is that by the time everything happens, the characters are too set in their ways to even find the drive to look for a better solution. Even the characters who know about it all, like Kaine, do not really have a choice due to the curse of Tyrann, or various other factors. The fact of the matter in the world they live in is that, even if confronted with the truth, the characters would not change their goals. Beside the moment in the Shadowlord's castle where Nier asks to stop way too late for it to be reasonable, the truth is that they could never really stop. The conflict was only going to end one of two ways. Either Shades were wiped out and replicants left free, or all the replicants would eventually be forced to give up their individuality to return to being just a body for the Shades. There is no justice in any of the actions taken by either the heroes or the villains of the game, whoever you decide those sides are. Just the illusion of being in the right for both of them, and even once that illusion shatters, the reality is that things could have only gone the same way. While I often find myself following this train of thought, I also kinda feel it's a bit too pessimistic, especially considering how meaningful and striking endings D and E are in this game. The Eyrie is an example of the kind of coexistence the two parties were able to agree to, but were so afraid of the consequences of their actions they would not even leave their homes. That faint glimmer of hope is there though, where the hero is not completely incapable of questioning their situation, and that really is the tragedy here. The failure of communication, Shades and Replicants speaking entirely different tongues, and most attempts to bridge their divide shattered by your hand, like Louise and the Eyrie. Language to this day often feels like an insurmountable barrier, and as Vice says, the information you have access to shapes who you are. This is another area where the medium the story is told through is very important. Plenty of video games uncritically glorify and justify violence, or treat it as little more than window dressing for their combat mechanics, and it's in this context that we find a harsh critique of this refusal to challenge these tropes and norms that we have grown complacent with. This refusal is what leads to all the tragedy. Just like in Spec Ops The Line, it's not meant to make you feel bad for playing the game, like I've heard so many people say. It's meant to spark some sort of reflection inside you. It's meant to get you to think critically about what the stories you engage with actually say, and discern what narratives actually use bloodshed to make statements that have value as art. And Nier does an excellent job at highlighting the tragedy inherent in the kind of games where hundreds of faceless enemies are repeatedly cut down without pause. You could say the world is a fundamentally broken mess, where it would seem kill or be killed is the only underlying law. But in the darkest moments, the characters find drive and meaning in their relationship with one another. So much so that when Yona is finally safe but Kaina's life is at stake, Nier is willing to give up his own happiness instead of living out the rest of his days with his sister. Ending E carries on with this idea, with Kaina having lived 3 years knowing she was missing something important to her but unable to remember it, finally reclaiming the relationship that well and truly saved her, reinforcing how moments of beauty can be found even in the worst of all possible worlds. Which brings us nicely to the new ending in the remake. It has definitely shaken things up quite a bit. The original conclusion was the bittersweet last sacrifice of a man who understands and tries to atone for his mistakes by paying the ultimate price for the sake of another. Version 1.22 gives us yet another addendum, where through the memory trees and Kaina's combined peculiarities, the younger version of Nier is brought back to life, finally earning his happy ending. There's a lot that can be said about the lore and in-world reasoning for this, but I don't think we necessarily have to rationalize everything that happens during this sequence. Hell, Taro himself said that trying to understand all of the lore will probably leave you more confused than just engaging with each piece on its own terms. I feel like tonally endings D and E couldn't be further apart from each other, and a part of me likes D more because I guess I just like sad stuff. But I also find it fascinating how the intended conclusion changes the lens with which I view the story. Originally, D was definitive, permanent, and a perfect bookend to the adventure. But in the landscape of media, there is no such thing as a real ending. Everything can be replayed, rewatched, or reread, and nothing's to keep another cycle from happening. It's brilliant then that ending E is accessed precisely by engaging in this act. Simply starting the game again from zero and carrying on until we reach the pivoting point in Kaina's life. Kaina is our only true and lasting connection with the game, the very reason we did what we did, and in spite of it all, she still remembers. Not Nier, but she remembers the void left by him, the adventure, the experience. Memories aren't so simple to be deleted without leaving the feeling that something is missing. Just like when replaying a game from the start it all comes flooding back, so does the memory of Nier, and we're finally able to find peace in recalling what it meant to us. Only through the power of digital memory, being able to tell when the player is returning to the game, can something like this happen, and connect so deeply to our actual memories. Because no matter how insignificant you think your actions are, they happen. The people who care about you, and believe me when I say they exist, regardless of who I'm talking to, will still feel your absence no matter what. Ending E hits you like a beam of sunlight piercing through your window blinders, and I can't disrespect that. Sometimes a happy ending is all we need. There's redemption to be found in both endings, but with the return of Nier, I can't help but think this was supposed to symbolize a more hopeful outlook on the world. Literally bringing someone back to life through our memory of them is one hell of an understandable desire, and seeing it concretized as the definitive ending of a game where loss is plentiful, well, what can I say other than it's very powerful. And this strikes at the heart of what I find endlessly fascinating about Nier. It's one of the most powerful depictions of the beauty and poetry of sacrifice, the will to surrender something of your own for the sake of another for no personal gain. The way Nier finds atonement in one final selfless act, yet leaves an indelible trace in the memories of those he cared most for, and ultimately lives on, is very inspiring, despite the atrocities it commits. All of this is reflected and strengthened by our relationship with memory, both digital and our own, reinforcing the emotions we feel and giving everything a more tangible and palpable weight. So that was Nier, a tale of tragedy, misguided violence, incommunicability, and horrible suffering. Yet just as much a tale of warmth, humanity, companionship, and trying to be there for the people close to you. The human experience in its infinite intricacies and complexities is conveyed beautifully in its ensemble of villains, outcasts, and average folk. Hope is found, questioned, crushed, and rebuilt by the cast while they bumble their way through the mess that is life. For as large as is our capability for harm, war, and othering of those who are deep down just like us, so is also our ability to love, support, empathize, and understand other people and living beings. Both realities exist within us at the same time, for wherever there is a heart of darkness, so there is one of light. So if you gotta take something away from my long meandering about all of this, just try to be good to others, act with kindness rather than hatred, and be understanding towards the struggles of those around you. So, I made it. Despite all the effort this took and university demanding more and more out of me as I strive towards the academic career of my dreams, I made it to the end of this video. I've always wanted to make something like this. I hope you find it came out well. The Nier games have played a downright foundational role in the development of my personal philosophy and beliefs, and I wanted to make something that reflects that for the longest time. I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I had to go through so much to make this single video. As it turns out, my microphone sucks ass, but I feel like everything else came off the way I wanted. I still can't believe I have it out and uploaded to YouTube right now. And with that said, one last thank you to everyone that made it this far. Everything can be replayed, rewatched, or reread, and nothing's to keep another cycle from happening. And I hate this goddamn...